What if the throne you covet is cursed, and the only thing it bequeaths is death? In a kingdom where airless thrones stand like ominous statues, a deadly game brews beneath the surface, waiting for the foolish and the ambitious. Bloodlines matter, until they don't. A ruler's legacy can turn to ash, but what happens when kings and queens die without a successor? Chaos reigns. Treachery festers like a wound. In this hellscape, the only thing thicker than blood is betrayal, and the only thing more lethal than a dagger is the whisper of hope. Picture this, a court of desperate nobles, eyes glinting like sharpened blades as they vie for a throne that promises only ruin. You think you're clever? Think again. The ascent is a slippery slope, and for every noble who thinks they can outwit the others, there's a trap waiting to snap shut. One wrong word, one misplaced glance, and you find yourself facing a chamber of horrors where the throne doesn't just require loyalty, it demands a sacrifice. Consider this, the throne is airless, but that doesn't mean it's vacant. Power has a way of inhabiting the most unexpected vessels. A king's ghost haunts the chambers, and every time you hear a creak in the floorboards, consider it a warning. Alliances shift like shadows, and trust is the most dangerous game of all. One moment you're sipping wine at a lavish feast, the next you're poisoned, your throat constricting in a slow dance with death. Laughter echoes, but it's the kind that freezes your bones. The jesters are the only ones with their heads intact, because in this court, laughter is the last weapon left. What's the price of ambition? It's not what you think. It's not gold, not land. It's blood. It's loyalty bought with whispered secrets and the promise of power, exchanged in dimly lit corridors where the air thickens with treachery. You tell yourself you're smarter than the last fool, yet here you are, standing at the edge of a precipice, peering into the abyss that others have fallen into before you. The last one who tried to claim the throne? They found themselves dangling from the rafters, a lifeless marionette in a game of puppetry gone wrong. Is your ambition worth the risk? Can you navigate the shifting loyalties, the ravenous hunger for power, and the bitter taste of betrayal? You think you'd survive? You think you're the clever one? Survival isn't just about wit, it's about playing the long game in a world where every friend could be a dagger in disguise. So, sharpen your mind and steel your heart. The throne awaits, but it doesn't come without a price. Would you dare to claim it, or will you fall prey to the darkness that lurks around every corner? Welcome to the court of the airless throne, where the only rule is survival, and the only certainty is blood. The wind howled through the empty halls, a mournful wail that echoed off the stone walls, whispering secrets of a throne bereft of an heir. Water dripped somewhere in the shadows, a metronome marking time with a relentless, haunting rhythm. I stood there, heart pounding, as I watched Lady Elise, her fingers trembling, tracing the intricate patterns of the tapestry hanging beside her, her world woven into every thread, yet so frayed and vulnerable. The king was dead, and with him, the certainty of the future crumbled like old parchment in our hands. Look at us, she hissed, her voice raw, yet somehow melodic, each word a dagger. We're like crows scavenging on a carcass. Her dark hair, untamed and wild, framed a face that had once radiated strength but was now a mask of fear. Every noble in the kingdom is waiting for their chance to pounce. I felt the weight of the word settle like a stone in my gut. The air crackled with unspoken dread, a tension that stretched thin, ready to snap. Lady Elise had always been a firebrand, quick to laugh, quick to anger, but now that flicker of life seemed snuffed out, replaced by a haunting uncertainty. Her father's throne, a magnificent seat of power, was now a pit filled with shadows, and in that darkness, ambition thrived. Do you think they'll come for us? I whispered, half terrified, half excited by the notion. The usurpers, I mean. Elise turned to face me, her eyes glinting with something fierce, something desperate. They'll come for everything. They'll come for you, for me. They'll come for the very air we breathe. There was a vulnerability in her tone that made my heart ache. She was not the only one who felt the chill of the unknown. I remembered the stories told in hushed tones, of kings and queens, of blood-soaked trials and midnight betrayals. It was a history rich with violence, lined with the bones of the ambitious. And here we were, embroiled in the same dark dance, fear pressing us tighter together, like two lovers lost in a storm. Do you think people will remember us? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, as if saying it out loud would conjure the ghosts of history. Or will we be like shadows, flickering in the corners of a forgotten dream? She laughed, but it was a brittle sound, like glass shattering. If we're lucky, they'll remember us for our missteps. They'll write stories of our failures, of how we crumbled under the weight of a crown too heavy to bear. Her laughter hung in the air, a ghostly echo, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Here we were, standing in a world that had lost its way, while beyond the castle walls, a storm brewed. The people were restless. They were hungry for a ruler, a savior, or perhaps just a scapegoat. And then there was Marcus, my brother, my rival, a boy turned man by circumstance, standing at the precipice of our future. I could see him pacing in the courtyard below, his hands clenched, his face set in a mask of determination. He had always been the favored son, the golden child, yet now he was a tempest, swirling with unspent rage and ambition. Marcus thinks he can unite them, I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. But he has no idea what he's up against. Elise turned her gaze to him, her expression unreadable. He's a fool, then. All of them are. They don't understand that power is a fickle mistress. It gives you everything, but it can just as easily take it all away. I shuddered at her words, feeling the truth chill me to the bone. The night was closing in, and shadows danced at the edges of my vision, taunting me, promising something sinister. I thought of the throne, an empty seat that promised greatness yet held the weight of despair. What haunted me most wasn't the thought of losing my life, but rather the idea of being forgotten. What if we fail? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Elise stepped closer, our breaths mingling in the frigid air. Failure is a part of life, she murmured, her gaze piercing through me. But it's the legacy that frightens me. I don't want to be remembered as a cautionary tale, as the footnote in someone else's story. I nodded, feeling the swell of desperation rise within me, a tide threatening to pull us under. Our lives felt like a precarious tightrope, the fall waiting to devour us whole. In that moment, I realized the enormity of our choice. We could either cling to the remnants of our dignity or plunge into the chaos unfolding around us. A clock chimed somewhere in the distance, its sound echoing like a heartbeat. Time was slipping through our fingers like grains of sand, and with each tick, the spectre of the heirless throne loomed larger, more oppressive. The weight of the impending succession crisis pressed down on us, suffocating in its intensity. Do you believe in ghosts? I asked, my voice trembling. What do you mean? Elise replied, brow furrowed. Do you believe the past haunts us? Do you think the dead whisper to the living, urging them to make better choices? She offered a half smile, a flicker of her old self. Only if they want to see us fail. And as I stood there, the room heavy with the scent of despair and the flickering light of dying torches, I felt it, an intense, almost electric energy in the air, signaling the start of something monumental. The heirless throne was not just a legacy, it was a battleground, a stage where the past would clash violently with the present. I knew then, without a doubt, that we would confront the ghosts, the ambitions, and the blood that had been spilled before us. The chaos of our world awaited, seductive and terrifying. And in the silence that followed, I could almost hear the clock ticking, counting down the moments until everything would change. The sun was a bruised orange, bleeding over the horizon as the city of Mycenae lay in wait, a ghost of its former self. The air was thick with the scent of loss, and the shadows of the crumbling walls whispered secrets long buried. Each stone, each crack, held the weight of 1,000 dreams unfulfilled. I remember the way it felt, stepping into that desolation, every heartbeat echoing like a distant drumbeat of a time when power pulsed through these very streets, when kings ruled with iron fists and unyielding hearts. Now, there was only silence, heavy, suffocating silence. Alizia stood at the edge of a crumbling terrace, staring into the abyss of her future, her fingers digging into the earth. She was the last of her line, the last flicker of a dying flame. She wore her crown like a noose, a constant reminder of the lineage that had crumbled to dust, her bloodline extinguished in a tide of betrayal. I remember the way her shoulders trembled as the wind whispered her name, taunting her with the ghosts of ancestors who had once wielded power. She was a lioness without a pride, fierce yet vulnerable, her heart a fortress made of flaws, loves unreturned, hopes dashed against the jagged rocks of reality. Within the shadows lurked Orion, a man whose heart was a battlefield, torn between loyalty and love. He watched Alizia from the shadows, a spectre of a soldier who had once defended her father, now caught in a web of duty and desire. His own family had fallen in the wars that shattered kingdoms, and he had inherited the scars of their demise. "I remember the siege," he would whisper in the dark, his voice a low rumble, the smell of blood and betrayal, the weight of choices unmade. Each recollection was a dagger thrust deep into his soul, reminding him of the lives lost, the dreams crushed beneath the heels of ambition. The clock chimed, its sound reverberating through the valley like a warning bell, each toll a reminder of time slipping through their fingers. Alizia clenched her fists, feeling the pulse of history, a river of loss rushing through her veins. "I am a queen without a kingdom," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, a prayer, or a curse, I couldn't tell. Her gaze flickered to Orion, and in that moment, the air crackled with an unspoken tension, a bridge over a chasm of despair. They were two lost souls bound together by fate's cruel hand, yet pulled apart by the weight of their legacy. The sun dipped lower, shadows lengthening as the city creaked under the weight of its own history. I felt the chill of inevitability wrapping around me. Alizia's heart was a fragile thing, crumbling under the pressure of expectation. "What if I am not enough?" she asked Orion, her eyes glinting with the tears of 1,000 fears. "What if I cannot carry the weight of my ancestors?" He stepped closer, the heat of his body a stark contrast to the coldness that enveloped her. "You are everything they were, Alizia. You carry their fire, even in the darkest night." But what did that fire matter when the night threatened to consume them both? The city stood as a testament to grandeur and ruin, a haunting echo of the empires that had risen before only to fall without heirs. I could feel the past pressing in around me, the ghosts of kings and queens marching through the corridors of my mind, their laughter a twisted melody of triumph and despair. They bathed once a year, I chuckled darkly to myself, so yeah, romance was earthy. But there was nothing funny about the fate that awaited Alizia, a fate written in blood, ambition, and the chilling absence of heirs. The night was suffocating, a blanket of darkness shrouding their hopes and fears. Orion reached for Alizia, their hands brushing against each other, a spark igniting in the cold, heavy air. "We can change the story," he said, but even as he spoke, the words felt like a promise made to ghosts. "We can rewrite the ending." But how could they when the ink was already dry, when the pages were already filled with the tragic tales of those who had come before them? It felt absurd, the weight of history pressing down on them until the very air was thick with the ghosts of those who had come before, their bitter lessons woven into the fabric of the world. "The night is alive with their whispers," Alizia breathed, her voice a fragile thread in the darkness. "Their dreams are heavy on my heart." I felt the tremor in her words, the way they hung in the air like smoke. She was a vessel of dreams unfulfilled, her spirit a tapestry woven from the threads of loss and longing. As they stood together, heartbeats entangled, I felt their silent pact. The shadows danced around them, the echoes of fallen empires swirling like leaves caught in a tempest. It was a moment suspended in time, a breath drawn before a plunge into the abyss. The world outside was crumbling, but within that fragile connection, there was a flicker of hope. They were bound together, two souls entwined in a desperate dance against fate, against the crushing weight of lineage and expectation. But just as the night deepened, so too did the darkness that surrounded them. The ghosts stirred, their whispers rising to a fever pitch, a cacophony of warnings and wishes, drowning out the fragile hope that flickered like a candle in the storm. I could see it in their eyes, the fear mingling with determination, the heartache woven into the very fabric of their being. And in that moment, as dawn threatened to break the spell, I understood the terrifying truth: empires have fallen before, without heirs to carry their burdens, their dreams extinguished in the cruel dance of time. What would become of Alizia and Orion? The answer hung in the air like a promise unfulfilled, a question that would echo through centuries, leaving only shadows in its wake, a haunting reminder of the empires that once roared with life, now a mere whisper of what could have been. The clock ticked on, relentless and unyielding, as the sun rose on another day, and the shadows of history stretched long into the horizon. The clock struck midnight, its echo reverberating through the silent streets, a haunting reminder that time waits for no one. I stood alone in the shadows of an abandoned square, the moonlight pooling like spilled ink on cobblestones, illuminating the weight of the moment. The air was thick with tension, charged like an unstruck match, waiting for a spark, waiting to ignite the chaos that was already swirling beneath the surface. The echoes of footsteps were fading, but the threat lingered, like a dark whisper woven into the fabric of this forsaken place. I remember the fear in Sarah's eyes, wide and glistening with unspoken words, as if they were trapped in some spectral grip of sorrow. She stood rigid, her shoulders hunched, a small figure against the vastness of the empty square, where the ghost of leadership once thrived. Now, it was a power vacuum, an absence so palpable it choked the air. What had once been a lively assembly of voices, passionate, hopeful, had shattered into disarray, leaving only fragments behind. She was the heart among the ruins, beating fiercely, desperate to restore a flicker of unity. "Do something," she'd pleaded, her voice cracking like dry leaves underfoot. I could hear the urgency clawing its way out of her throat, a guttural echo of the urgency that enveloped us. And then there was Marcus. Oh, Marcus, the reluctant warrior, the embodiment of indecision. He was a man trapped in the swirling vortex of his own doubts, eyes darting like a sparrow caught in a storm. I could see it in his clenched fists, how they trembled, betraying the tempest beneath his calm facade. "I can't lead," he had whispered to me once, shame drenching his words. "What if I fail? What if I'm wrong?" The weight of his regret hung over him like a black shroud. In that moment, he represented every leader too afraid to step forward, paralyzed by the uncertainty that surrounded us like a thick fog. But tonight, the air was different. It crackled with potential, a strange electricity swirling with the promise of confrontation. The shadows stretched long, closing in, as if the very darkness was an enemy conspiring with our fears. Sarah's voice cut through the haze, pleading for action, for courage. "If we don't act, we lose everything," she said, urgency flooding her tone. I could feel it too, the suffocating weight of what was at stake. It threatened to suffocate me, wrap its hands around my throat, squeezing tighter with every heartbeat. I remember the way the wind howled, a mournful sound that carried the cries of the abandoned. It was a reminder of the people who had trusted us, who had looked to us for guidance. Their faces danced in my mind, each one a haunting spectre demanding answers. We were standing on the brink of a precipice, our indecision holding us hostage, teetering between hope and despair. The chaos around us was alive, breathing, a living entity yearning to consume the remnants of our resolve. With a sharp intake of breath, I stepped closer to Sarah, the weight of her gaze anchoring me. "What if we fail?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, laced with uncertainty. Her gaze was fierce, cutting through my doubts like a blade. "What if we don't?" The challenge hung heavy in the air, and I felt my pulse quicken, the beat synchronizing with the impending storm. It was a call to arms, a reckoning with the shadows that loomed. In that moment, all our flaws, our fears, our regrets, became a tapestry woven together, intertwining our fates. We were the remnants of a broken leadership, standing at the edge of chaos, and I could feel the gravity of it all, the weight pulling us down, threatening to swallow us whole. But the darkness was also a canvas, a space to reimagine ourselves, to dare to rise from the embers of our inadequacies. Then, like a bolt from the blue, Marcus stepped forward, breaking through the suffocating silence. "I'll do it," he declared, his voice steady yet trembling, a fragile promise wrapped in fierce resolve. The wind stilled, time suspended in that heartbeat, as if the universe itself awaited his next words. I could see his transformation, how the shadows of doubt began to recede, replaced by a flicker of something brighter. "I will lead," he repeated, each word a declaration carved into stone. The air thickened with the weight of his resolve, and I felt the tremors of hope ripple through us. For a moment, the ghost of chaos quieted, as if it too recognized the gravity of this choice, the shift in the balance of power. We had stepped into the unknown, the shadowy depths of uncertainty, but we weren't alone anymore. Sarah took his hand, a fire igniting in her eyes, and together, they became a beacon in the darkness. Yet, looming just beyond the horizon, the chaos was restless, twisting and turning, waiting for its moment to strike. I could feel it creeping back, a dark tide threatening to drown us, a reminder that leadership is never without its cost. The ghosts of our past, our failures, danced in the periphery, taunting, whispering the bitter truth of what happened when the light of leadership flickers out. Together, I said, my voice emerging with newfound strength, a rallying cry against the shadows that threatened to engulf us. We could feel the pulse of the night, the heart of the city, thrumming beneath our feet, a reminder that this moment was larger than us, larger than our fears. The winds howled once more, and I closed my eyes, surrendering to the chaos, daring it to consume me. And then, just like that, the moment shattered, an explosion of sound and fury erupted from the dark corners of the square. They were coming. The shadows we had feared, the ghosts of discontent, were rising, hungry for chaos, ready to devour the remnants of hope. But we were ready, we had chosen to stand, to confront the darkness head-on and carve our own path through the night. The city around us was alive with the pulse of uncertainty, every heartbeat a reminder that the battle was only just beginning, the power vacuum still looming, waiting for its claim. Standing together, we faced the oncoming storm, hearts racing, ready to plunge headfirst into the chaos, the power vacuum, and the uncertainty that lay ahead. A flicker of hope ignited within me, as we took our first step toward the unknown, together, unyielding, defiantly alive. The air buzzed with a tension that crackled like lightning before a storm. In the heart of the city, shadows danced frantic against the cobblestones, twisting and curling in a desperate waltz, as if the very ground beneath their feet quaked with the impending chaos. I stood there, heart pounding, eyes wide, drowning in the suffocating silence that hung heavy, thick as fog. It was a moment suspended in time, a moment that would echo long after the dust settled. Mara's hands trembled, her knuckles white as she gripped the hilt of her dagger. "I can't believe it's come to this," she whispered, voice raw. The words clung to the air, thick with despair and bitter resolve. Each heartbeat thudded in my ears, a frantic drumbeat heralding the storm of emotions building within me. I wanted to scream, to shatter the silence, but the weight of our choices pressed down, silencing my thoughts. Across the square, I caught a glimpse of Jonah, his face a mask of defiance and fear, a tempest of conflicting emotion swirling in his deep-set eyes. "They're coming for us," he spat, the anger lacing his voice like poison. It was a bitter truth, and we all knew it. The rival factions had turned their sights on us, their claims clashing like steel against steel, and we stood at the precipice of destruction. We can't let them take what's ours. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could fight back against the chaos, against the factions that tore at the seams of our world like ravenous wolves. But doubt gnawed at me, a relentless creature feasting on my hope. I remembered the whispered promises of unity, how we had once believed our strength lay in our bonds. Now, those same bonds felt like chains, binding us to a fate we couldn't escape. Mara stepped closer to me, her voice low, almost a plea. "They think they can divide us. They think we'll turn on each other." Her gaze pierced through the shadows, searching for the courage we had lost. "But we won't. Not now." Her words hung in the air, a fragile thread tethering us to the possibility of resilience. I wanted to reach out, to pull her into an embrace that would shield us from the chaos consuming our lives. But fear held me back, and I felt the weight of our conflict pressing down on us like a heavy shroud, smothering the flicker of hope that dared to emerge. I could almost hear the distant clash of swords, the cries of those caught in the throes of battle echoing through my mind. Each sound was a reminder of our reality, a reminder of the lives at stake. The factions had grown arrogant, their claims escalating into a blood-soaked rivalry that sought to consume us all. And we, the unwitting pawns in their game, stood on the verge of annihilation. As the shadows deepened, I felt the chill of uncertainty creep into my bones. It was creeping into my thoughts, too, distorting the faces of those I once trusted. I remembered laughter shared over mugs of ale, the warmth of friendship forged in the fires of adversity. But now, all I could feel was the cold bite of betrayal lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. Jonah's voice broke through my reverie, raw and fierce. "We need to make a choice. Join the fight or let them tear us apart." His words were a challenge, a call to arms that stirred something within me, something primal and fierce. But beneath the bravado, I saw the cracks in his armor, the fear that churned within him like a storm. He was just as scared as I was, and that realization sent a shiver down my spine. In that moment, I was struck by the absurdity of it all. Here we were, tangled in a web of complex loyalties and shifting alliances, scrambling to stake our claim in a world that threatened to swallow us whole. We can't just dive in blindly, I snapped, frustration flaring. What if we end up dead or worse? But the fire in Jonah's eyes refused to dim. What's worse than living under their tyranny? They'll take everything, our lives, our dreams. He stepped forward, his voice dropping to a whisper, laced with urgency. I won't let them. I watched the determination etch itself deeper into his features, and I felt a flicker of something, admiration. Fear? It was hard to distinguish between the two. I wished I could find that same bravado within me, but all I felt was the suffocating weight of uncertainty. Are you ready to fight for it? Mara's words cut through the chaos, anchoring me amidst the swirling storm. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to roar back at the darkness threatening to envelop us. But the truth clawed at my throat, a choking fear that silenced my voice. Could we really stand against the tide of animosity and hatred? Or would we drown in the flood of our own choices, lost to the shadows that taunted us? In that moment, the world outside faded, and it felt like time itself paused, holding its breath, waiting for our decision. We stood on the brink, three souls woven into a tapestry of fear, hope, and desperation. The factions loomed like specters at the edges of our consciousness, whispering promises and threats, driving wedges into our hearts. I remembered the dreams that had woven our lives together, dreams of unity, dreams of a better world. They felt like ghosts now, slipping through my fingers like grains of sand. Our bonds were fraying, the fabric of our existence unraveling before my eyes. But in the depths of that darkness, I felt a flicker, a hint of something bright and defiant. Mara's hand reached out, fingers brushing against mine, a spark of warmth igniting a flicker of courage. Together, we can face anything. The shadows loomed larger, the factions drawing closer, and the air thickened with the weight of our choices. I took a breath, inhaling the scent of impending conflict, adrenaline coursing through my veins. We couldn't go back now, we had to step forward into the unknown, no matter how terrifying it felt. With a nod that felt like a promise, we braced ourselves against the storm, hearts racing, souls entwined in a dance of defiance. The world around us faded into a blur, the cacophony of chaos closing in as we prepared to confront the factions that sought to tear us apart. The night was dark, but in that moment, we were resolute, ready to fight for our place, ready to rise against the shadows that threatened to consume us. The moon hung low, a ghostly lantern in the inky sky, casting shadows that danced like lost souls on the cobblestones of the silent city. The air was heavy, crackling with unspoken words and the weight of unshed tears. I could hear my heart beating, a frantic drum echoing in the vast emptiness around me. It felt as though the world held its breath, waiting for something monumental, something terrifying, to break the stillness. My fingers trembled as I clutched the hilt of my sword, the cool metal grounding me amidst the chaos swirling in my mind. In the distance, the sound of hoofbeats thundered, a storm of urgency approaching. My heart raced. They were here. I thought of Ilara, her face pale against the night, a flicker of defiance caught in her emerald eyes. She was never one to back down, never one to yield, even when the very ground beneath us crumbled into chaos. She had a fire in her, a spark that threatened to ignite the world around her. But tonight, that spark felt like a dangerous flame. I remember the first time we stood side by side, young and foolish, dreaming of glory, of justice. We were warriors in our own minds, radiant with hope. But now, hope was an echo, a distant memory drifting through the shadows. What remained was a desperate struggle against the tide of uncertainty that churned within the hearts of the nobility, those once proud pillars of society now reduced to mere whispers of their former selves. The shadows stretched longer as the hoofbeats grew louder, and panic clawed at my throat. I remember the nights spent under starlit skies, planning our future, but now those dreams seemed as fragile as the moonlight slipping through the dark. There's no one to lead us, no one to guide us, I had told Ilara just days before, my voice shaking with the weight of truth. What if we fall apart? Then we make our own path, she had replied, her voice steady, fierce as the winds that howled through our broken city. And yet, here we were, standing at the precipice of choice, loyalty pulling us in different directions like the tides of the restless sea. Across the square, I caught a glimpse of Lord Darien, his silver hair shining like a beacon amid the darkness. He was a relic of a bygone era, clinging stubbornly to the vestiges of nobility, yet his eyes bore the haunted look of a man who had lost everything that mattered. His hands shook as he clutched an ancient scroll, a feeble attempt at re-establishing order in these tumultuous times. "We must unite," he cried, his voice cracking like the fragile remains of our shattered society. But unity felt like a far-off dream, a cruel joke whispered by the winds. "What do you want from us?" Elara shouted, her voice piercing the night, raw and full of fury. "You think we're just going to follow you into the abyss? You've led us into ruin." Her words hung in the air like a spell, electrifying the tension, and for a brief moment, I could see the flickers of fear in Darien's eyes, the cracks in his armor. But beneath the tumultuous surface of our conflict lay a deeper question, one that gnawed at my heart. What did loyalty truly mean in a leaderless world? I looked around, at the faces of those who had once stood by our sides. Friends, allies, now scattered like ashes in the wind, each wrestling with their own demons, their own burdens of grief and betrayal. I remember when we were naive enough to believe that loyalty was unwavering, an unbreakable bond forged in the fires of battle. But betrayal had seeped into our ranks, like a venomous serpent, coiling tighter with each passing day. I felt it, the palpable tension, each heartbeat a reminder of the choices we were forced to make. Would we stand together, or would we allow the shadows to consume us one by one? As Darien's voice faltered, the approaching storm of hooves crescendoed, and dread gripped my chest. Who were they? Friends turned enemies? Or just ghosts of power hungry for blood? The echoes of battle rang in my ears, memories of swords clashing, cries of anguish swirling around us like a haunting melody. I couldn't help but wonder if we were all just actors in a tragic play, dancing on the edge of a knife, each step a gamble against the fates. Elara stepped forward, her silhouette stark against the pale moonlight. "We will not be your pawns." Her voice was a war cry, a battle anthem that shook the ground beneath us. The muscles in my chest tightened, admiration battling with fear as I watched her stand there, a defiant flame against the encroaching darkness. "Yet here we are, Elara," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper, lost and leaderless. The crowd wavered, and I could feel the shift in allegiance, like the tide pulling at the shore, hungry and relentless. I could almost taste the salt of their uncertainty, the bitterness of broken trust. It was intoxicating, this heady mixture of fear and hope, a dangerous elixir that promised either salvation or doom. A shadow loomed behind Darien, a figure cloaked in darkness, as if the night itself had come to claim its own. My breath caught, a chilling realization dawning upon me. This was not just a battle for loyalty, it was a reckoning. The air thickened with the weight of choices unmade, and I could feel the walls closing in, the echoes of my past roaring like a tempest within me. "Stand with me, or perish alone," the figure hissed, voice like ice cutting through the steamy breath of a million whispered fears. The choice was stark and terrifying, and I could feel my heart racing, each beat a reminder that loyalty in this leaderless world was as fragile as the moonlight, and just as easily snuffed out. And as the shadows closed in, a storm brewing in the distance, I knew that the time for choice had come. The future awaited, shrouded in darkness, and I could only hope that we would find the light together, or be consumed by the very shadows we fought against. It was midnight, and the moon hung like a silver knife in the sky, sharp enough to cut through the oppressive darkness that clung to the castle walls. I could hear the distant clang of swords, a rhythm of chaos echoing through the stone corridors, merging with a whispered chant that felt both sacred and sinister. The weight of uncertainty pressed against my chest, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I'd never seen fear carve into faces like this. It wasn't just the fear of death, but the gnawing dread of what came after, where a shattered lineage might lead. In the grand hall, shadows flickered against the cold stone, where candles fought a losing battle against the encroaching night. I spotted him, Lord Alaric, his face pale, eyes haunted. Once a fearless warrior, now reduced to a mere ghost of his former self, haunted by the spectre of a throne without an heir. "There is no peace in silence," he murmured, echoing what I too felt in the marrow of my bones. The whispers of the priests rang out, their voices tinged with desperation, praying for divine intervention, for a child, for a salvation that always felt just beyond reach. And then there was Elara, Alaric's sister, the very embodiment of anguish and fury. She stood rigid, her hands clenched into fists that trembled with suppressed rage. Every hour that passes, the shadows grow longer, she spat through gritted teeth. Her heart was a battlefield, loyalty to her brother warring against the desires drumming in her own chest. She sought power, yes, but not for the throne. No, she desired the temple, the sanctity of belief in a realm that had turned its back on them. What good are prayers when the gods themselves are silent? Her words cut through the chaos, sharp enough to draw blood. The priests gathered, their robes sweeping the ground like restless spirits, eyes glistening with a fervor that bordered on madness. "The divine tests us," one shouted, his voice cracking like a whip. "This is our punishment for forsaking tradition." For a moment, I saw Alaric's resolve falter as he gripped the nearest table, knuckles white, trembling in the face of an unseen enemy. Without an heir, the throne was up for grabs, and the lust for power smelled like smoke in the air. "Let them clash," Elara hissed, her voice low and deadly, the fire in her gaze illuminating the hidden corners of her ambition. "Let them tear each other apart. I will rise from the ashes." There was beauty in her madness, a wonderfully haunting essence. I felt drawn to her, drawn to the chaos like I was a moth to a flame. I wanted to hold her hand, to feel the heat of that ambition, to dance with the shadows that threatened to consume her. Time twisted around us like a noose, tightening with each passing second, each heartbeat echoing in the oppressive silence. I remembered the stories my mother told, tales of kingdoms crumbling, of blood spilled in the name of an empty throne. They bathed once a year, I thought, a fleeting smile tugging at my lips, so yeah, romance was earthy. But as I watched Alaric and Elara, I realized that their love, whatever twisted version it was worth more than any tale spun by dreamers. The night wore on, and the tension thickened, wrapping around us like a shroud. I turned away from their desperate eyes, seeking solace in the flickering candlelight. I could almost taste the fear, bitter and metallic, as the priests began chanting again, a mantra that felt like a desperate summoning of lost hopes. "We invoke the spirit of the Ancient Ones." They pounded their fists against their chests, as if to awaken the echoes of power long buried beneath the weight of doubt. "Alaric," I said, stepping closer. "What if the gods have abandoned us?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. His gaze was distant, lost somewhere beyond the farthest stars. "Then we become our own gods," he whispered, a flicker of rebellion igniting behind his haunted eyes. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. Elara laughed, a sound that was both beautiful and terrifying, echoing like shards of glass in a quiet room. "And risk the wrath of the very heavens." She looked at us, her eyes wild with passion. "No. I'd rather burn. I'd rather turn to ashes than kneel before a silent god." What a raw, fierce declaration. I could feel my heart racing, as if it were trying to keep pace with the whirlwind of emotion swirling around us. Would they really seek to bend fate to their will? To confront the divine? And then it came, the sound of a door crashing open, a surge of armored figures spilling into the hall, a rival faction, hungry for power, scented with the metallic tang of betrayal. "Your time is over, Alaric. The gods have abandoned you, and so shall we." Their voices roared like thunder, drowning out the desperate prayers, drowning out everything. Chaos erupted. I stumbled back as swords clashed and steel sang its mournful song. Alaric was already moving, drawing his sword as if it were an extension of his very soul, while Elara fought by his side, a tempest of fury in each swing. I stood frozen, caught in a moment that felt like a nightmare bleeding into reality. My heart raced, pounding against my ribs like a caged beast. This was not just a battle for a throne, it was a battle for faith, for legacy, for the very essence of what it meant to believe. In the absence of an heir, they fought like the world hung in the balance, and perhaps it did. The moon shone brighter, casting everything into stark relief, blood would spill, and shadows would devour, but at what cost? Time unraveled and wound tighter, like a clock on the brink of striking midnight. I held my breath, feeling the weight of the moment press against me, the air thick with anticipation, with dread, with the bitter aftertaste of desperation. I couldn't move. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the chaos, from the very heartbeat of a fractured world. And as the clash of steel filled the air, I knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning of a darker tale, of ambition, of betrayal, of a struggle that would echo through eternity. The gods may be silent, but in their absence, a new power would rise, forged in the fires of desperation and hope. The city was on fire. Not literally, but the smoke of uncertainty hung heavy in the air, swirling like ghostly whispers through the cobblestone streets. The marketplace, usually bursting with life, lay frozen in an eerie silence, broken only by a distant wail that sliced through the tension like a knife. I stood there, heart racing, watching as two figures, a trader named Elias and a noblewoman turned refugee named Clara, clashed amid the chaos, their fates intertwined in a world unraveling at the seams. Elias, with his calloused hands and weary eyes, looked like a battered ship tossed on a merciless sea. His livelihood was built on the shifting tides of trade, and now, the currents were pulling him under. "You don't understand," he shouted, desperation thrumming in his voice. "Without stability, we're nothing. You think you can just come in and take what's left?" He gestured widely at the empty stalls, where dreams of prosperity had once danced with the promise of gold. Clara, her face streaked with dirt and despair, stood firm, but her heart was a fragile bird fluttering in a cage. She had lost everything: her home, her family, fleeing a kingdom crumbling in on itself. "I'm not here to take anything from you," she pleaded, her voice quaking. I just need something to survive." Her eyes shimmered with a raw intensity, a mix of fear and courage that dared the universe to break her further. "We all do." Around them, the shadows lengthened as the sun dipped, the city's pulse quickening in uncertainty. The scent of fear wafted through the air, mingling with the rot of discarded wares and lost hopes. I could feel it, an electric current, an impending storm. It was the palpable weight of desperation, the suffocating atmosphere of a people on the brink of collapse. I remember the moment the first punch hit, a jolt that seemed to reverberate through the very ground beneath us. Elias lunged forward, fists clenched, and for a split second, time suspended. Clara dodged, but the fluid grace of her movements revealed a raw vulnerability. The pain in her eyes, a deep, echoing abyss, told a story of loss that words could never capture. She had fought battles no one could see, scars etched in the lines of her brow, a warrior in a dress fraying at the hems. "Look around!" Elias shouted, his voice rising, desperation morphing into fury. "This is what happens when thrones are abandoned and kingdoms fracture. We're losing everything." He pointed towards the crumbling walls of the marketplace, each crack a testament to the crises that had gripped this land. The very air crackled with the ghosts of failed leadership, of broken promises, of trade routes severed like the ties between friends. I remember the echoes of the clock tower, each chime a reminder of passing time, of missed opportunities. The merchants who had once exchanged goods, laughter, and life were now mere shadows of their former selves, their dreams extinguished. Families were torn apart, livelihoods ripped to shreds, all because the fragile balance of power had shattered like glass, scattering shards of despair in every direction. Clara's voice cut through the din, a haunting melody of vulnerability. "Do you think I wanted this?" She was pleading now, her spirit fighting against the weight of hopelessness. "I'm just trying to find a way to survive in a world that's forgotten what it means to care." Her eyes were alive with a fierce fire, the kind that could ignite change, but it flickered dangerously in the face of Elias's fury. And yet, even as they fought, there was an unspoken bond, a recognition of shared suffering. They had both lost their footing in this chaotic dance of power and desperation. Clara's hands trembled slightly, revealing the truth of her fear, while Elias's anger was laced with a deep-seated sadness. Both were victims of a world spinning out of control, the trade routes between their hearts frayed, yet still yearning for connection. The marketplace felt like a battleground, but there was a beauty in the chaos, a reminder that every crisis births new possibilities. Fleeting glances exchanged between strangers hinted at the resilience of the human spirit. A child, wide-eyed and innocent, clung to his mother's skirt as the world crumbled around them, a poignant symbol of hope amidst despair. The tension escalated, an electric storm brewing, until Clara reached a breaking point. "We can't go on like this. We need to find a way to rebuild together," she exclaimed, her voice breaking, but there was strength there, raw, unfiltered strength. "What good is survival if we don't fight for each other? What good is wealth if we're standing alone among the ruins?" Elias's breath hitched, a flicker of doubt crossing his face, a momentary crack in his armor. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. In that moment, I could see the ghosts of their pasts woven into the fabric of their confrontation, every failure, every betrayal, every lost moment piling on their shoulders like stones. Time seemed to stretch and bend, each heartbeat echoing their internal struggles. Clara's determination resonated, and in that pulse, I felt the urgency of their plight. The city was not merely a backdrop, it was a living entity, breathing with the pain of its people. The shadows deepened, but within them lay the potential for transformation, a dark canvas waiting for a spark of light. As they stood there, on the precipice of change, the world around them began to shift. The whispers of the crowd grew louder, voices rising in a chorus of agreement, of hope. It was a cacophony of emotion, raw and unbridled, a swirling tide that spoke of resilience. And just like that, the moment hung in the balance, fragile yet potent. The crisis had birthed a new possibility, a glimpse of solidarity in a world torn apart. The flame of their confrontation flickered, but it was not extinguished. Instead, it transformed into something new, a beacon in the night, guiding the way through darkness into an uncertain dawn. I remember the weight of that moment, the intensity of their emotions intertwining like a delicate dance, the shadows looming large yet promising a flicker of light. As they found themselves caught in a web of raw vulnerability and fierce resolve, the economic fallout of their world lingered in the air, a haunting reminder of the stakes at play. In that frozen instant, everything felt possible, an electrifying promise that pulsed with the heartbeat of a city yearning for rebirth. I stood there, caught between their stories, their struggles entwining with the fate of a world at risk, and realized that this was only the beginning. The clock strikes midnight, an echoing chime that resonates through the silent streets, each note a harbinger of dread. The moon hangs low, casting a pallid glow on cobblestones slick with rain and secrets. This is where we find young Thomas, his breath a fog in the damp air, heart racing as if trying to flee his chest. He clutches a piece of parchment, ink smudged by trembling hands. A message, a summons to join the ranks of the unwilling, a call to arms that tears at the fragile threads of his life. He thinks of his mother, her weary face, and the way she now stares blankly at the walls, time erasing the hope from her eyes. "I remember," he whispers, his voice barely a breath. "I remember laughter in our home before the Lord's men came, before they demanded more than we had to give." The shadows seem to shift around him, whispering echoes of the past, an oppressive weight that clings like the stench of the plague that swept through the village last summer. In a distant alley, near the flickering light of a dying torch, stands Eliza, her hand stained with the remnants of her craft. The scent of bread still clings to her apron, a haunting reminder of the warmth that once filled her bakery. Now, all that remains are empty shelves and the hollow sound of her own heartbeat against the cold stone wall. She listens to the soft cries of her little sister, Frances, tucked behind her, eyes wide and innocent. "Eliza, why are they taking Papa?" Frances's voice is a fragile thread, a reminder of everything that is at stake. "I remember," Eliza murmurs, her heart clenching painfully. "I remember when we believed in the stories of heroes, knights who saved us, and the kings who promise peace. But what is a promise worth when it's built on the bones of the commoners? When did bravery become a burden, and courage a death sentence? Time moves slowly in this part of the world, a cruel joke played by the universe. The stars blink down, distant and apathetic, while Thomas steadies his breath and controls the tremor in his hands. In one agonizing moment, he stands on the precipice of decision, a choice that could shatter the fragile piece of his existence. What if I can't fight? What if I fall? His thoughts race like wild horses, galloping through the corridors of despair. Then, in the periphery, he spots Eliza's silhouette, framed by the feeble light that flickers like hope on the edge of extinction. She looks at him, and for a moment, the noise of the world fades. They share an unspoken understanding, the weight of their shared burdens palpable in the air, thick and suffocating. They are two souls marooned in their own lives, surrounded by the ghosts of what could have been. But the moment shatters as shouts erupt from the square, a cacophony of fear and rage. The Lord's men march through the streets like spectres of doom, their armor glinting ominously in the moonlight. Thomas grips the parchment tighter, feeling its coarse edges dig into his palm, a reminder of his fate. I remember when fear was just a shadow, not a blade poised at our throats, he thinks, feeling the pulse of anger swell within him. In the bakery, Eliza feels the ground beneath her tremble. She wants to shield Francis from the chaos, to shield herself from the truth clawing at the edges of her sanity. "We'll be okay. Just stay close," she whispers, though doubt laces her words. The memory of her father's warm hands kneading dough rushes back, mingling with the present, a painful reminder of the man who no longer walks through their doors. "Where is my father?" Francis asks again, innocence cracking like porcelain. The words stick in Eliza's throat, the answer too heavy to bear. He's working late, she lies, the facade crumbling like the bread she used to bake, a facade that the world continues to demand she uphold. And so they stand, two figures lost in the tempest of their realities, caught in the storm of a world that demands their sacrifice. The air thickens with the cries of the oppressed, the sounds of lives being uprooted, families torn apart. Thomas can hear it now, the cries that echo in the alleys, through the windows of homes where meals are shared and laughter used to reside. "I won't go," he whispers fiercely, though his chest is tight with fear. But as the shadows loom larger, the familiar sensation of dread coils around him, wrapping tighter, squeezing the breath from his lungs. The moon, once a symbol of hope, now feels like a spotlight, illuminating their despair, their insignificance in a world that has forgotten them. "I remember." He trails off, the words slipping into the void, lost amidst the din of their reality. In that moment, Eliza catches his eye, a fleeting connection that anchors them in the chaos. She steps forward, her brow furrowed with determination, and says, "If we're going to fight, we fight together. For them." She gestures to the shadows, to the ghostly figures of their neighbors, the ones who have already succumbed to despair. Thomas nods, the fire igniting within him, fanned by the strength of her resolve. They are flawed, they are scared, but they are not alone in their fear. They are the stories that linger in the air, the whispers of lives interrupted. The clock continues to tick, each second a reminder of the urgency of their plight. As the night wears on, the world outside shivers with uncertainty, but the bond between Thomas and Eliza ignites a spark. They stand on the edge of a precipice, ready to confront the shadows, ready to fight not just for their own souls but for the very essence of humanity that flickers like a candle in the dark. And as they take that first step into the unknown, it feels like a promise, a desperate but hopeful plea to reclaim not just their lives, but the lives of every commoner trapped in the shadows. The journey ahead is fraught with danger, but the fire within them burns brighter than the night, illuminating the path forward. The battle for their souls has just begun. The air thickens with the acrid smell of smoke and sweat, and the ground vibrates under the weight of chaos. A distant explosion shatters the silence, sending tremors through the heart of the city, a once proud bastion of strength now spiraling into a nightmare. Soldiers, once standing shoulder to shoulder in solidarity, now scatter like autumn leaves caught in a tempest, their faces twisted in confusion and fear. I see it clearly, Corporal Harris, his hands shaking, the gun slipping from his grip, eyes wide, staring into an abyss that seems to swallow the very ground beneath him. "What do we do now?" he shouts, a desperate echo lost in the cacophony of war. I remember the promise we made, under the pale glow of a fading sunset. There's a fragility to those moments, a shimmering beauty that now feels like a cruel joke. We were invincible then, or so we thought, fueled by youth and a misguided belief in heroism. But here we are, unraveling. This isn't just a battle, it's a collapse, a fracture so deep it gnaws at the soul. A shadow looms closer, and I turn to see Lieutenant Murray, his uniform torn, his face set in grim determination, but the light in his eyes flickers like a dying flame. "Stay together," he orders, but it sounds more like a plea than a command. His voice trembles, heavy with the weight of unspoken fears, and I see in him a mirror of my own desperation. We are not leaders anymore, we are shards of glass scattered across a battlefield, desperate to hold on, yet unable to find the way. Why aren't they listening? I whisper, more to myself than to anyone else. The answer hangs in the air, suffocating, a lack of direction, a leadership betrayed by itself. I can almost hear the ghosts of our past, warnings echoing in the silence. We are losing them, I mutter, looking to where men once stood resolute, now reduced to terrified whispers, their ranks crumbling like ancient ruins. The chaos surrounds us, an inferno of confusion and screams. I remember the stories of legendary commanders, their voices rising above the din, rallying their troops with the fervor of a firebrand preacher. But here, now, in the midst of this hell, leadership has withered, evaporated like mist under the sun. The clamor of dissent rises, a fever pitch of uncertainty and betrayal. Get a hold of yourself! Murray shouts, but I can see the cracks in his armor, the way his hands clench and unclench, fighting against the tide of despair. He's a soldier, and yet, in this moment, he feels as lost as Harris, as I. The flickering hope of our unity fades, consumed by shadows, the terrible realization that we are not a force, we are a fractured echo, a disjointed melody playing out of tune. I can feel the panic claw at my throat, choking me as I recall the faces of the men we've lost, their laughter, their youthful bravado. Once, they were invincible. Now, they're ghosts drifting through the haze. Each name is a stab in my gut, a reminder of a promise unfulfilled, a duty abandoned. If only we had held together, if only we had fought against the disintegration of our resolve. Murray turns suddenly, eyes glinting with desperation. We need to regroup. But there's disbelief in his voice, a hesitation that echoes in the air like an ominous drumbeat. Behind us, I hear the haunting sound of footsteps, not belonging to allies but to something more terrifying, an enemy emboldened by our fractures. Shadows loom closer, and I feel it, the suffocating weight of inevitability. Are we even fighting for the same cause anymore? Harris asks, and his words are like knives, carving into my consciousness, severing the last threads of hope. His fear is palpable, the quivering of his voice a symphony of vulnerability. I want to reassure him, to tell him that we're still a team, a family, but the truth is, I don't even know what we're fighting for anymore. Time stands still, a moment stretched into eternity, every second a reminder of our fragility. I can hear the distant wails of sirens, the heartbeat of a city caught in a chokehold. The shadows creep closer, and I can't help but think, this is how legends die, not with a bang but with a whimper, a soft surrender into the depths of despair. Fear coils in my stomach like a serpent, poisoning my resolve, as we stand on the edge of the abyss. And there's a sudden clarity, a horrifying realization that dawns, without leadership, without unity, we are nothing but a collection of broken dreams. I look at Murray, and in his eyes, I see the reflection of my own terror. We are lost, stranded in a desolate landscape of uncertainty, where hope flickers like a dying candle. Fight or flight, I mutter, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Choices echo in my mind, reverberating like gunfire. Do we stand and face our own disintegration? Or do we succumb to the shadows that threaten to consume us whole? Together? I ask, my voice barely a whisper, a fragile plea against the crashing waves of chaos. But Murray's gaze drifts, searching, as if he, too, is grappling with the weight of inevitability. The question lingers, heavy and unyielding, as the world around us dissolves into an ever-deepening void. And then, as if responding to the silent call of our desperation, the ground quakes again, a reminder that time does not wait, that the chaos does not relent. The air buzzes with tension, a haunting melody of despair, and I feel it, the heartbeat of the world, the pulse of everything we've lost, everything we fear we might lose again. We stand on the precipice, caught between the ghosts of what was and the shadows of what might be. The horizon darkens, and I know, deep down, that this moment, this unbearable tension, is only the beginning. No clear leadership to guide us, no promises left to hold on to, just the raw, visceral truth, we are fractured soldiers, and the storm is only just beginning. The night was choked with tension, the air heavy, thick like a smothering blanket, stretching over the city, a living organism that pulsed beneath the flickering streetlights. It felt like the earth held its breath. Somewhere in the distance, the sirens wailed, cutting through the darkness like a knife, a premonition, a herald of chaos. I was there, crouched behind a crumbling wall, heart racing, a spectre in shadows, a witness to the uprising that was brewing like a storm. I remember the faces, each one a mirror reflecting desperation and hope, anger and sorrow. Among them, Sarah, her fists clenched like coiled springs, her eyes burning with a fire that threatened to consume her. She had lost her mother to the cold hands of a government that no longer cared, a casualty of indifference. "They don't see us," she'd whispered to me, her voice trembling, "not until we scream." And scream we would. Then there was Amir, with his crooked smile that masked a world of pain. He cracked jokes, they slipped from his lips like smoke, ephemeral yet intoxicating. "You think this is bad," he'd laughed, waving a hand at the encroaching police lines. "Try standing in a line for bread. They treat us like we're invisible until we're not. Then it's all rubber bullets and tear gas." But beneath the humor, his eyes held shadows of memories, his father taken in the night, leaving behind only echoes of laughter that faded too quickly. Together, we stood on the cusp of something monumental, something terrifying. A march, a movement, born from the ashes of our lives. It began with whispered conversations in dimly lit cafes, where the scent of stale coffee mingled with the electricity of change. We gathered in secret, hearts racing, plotting next steps like rebellious children playing a dangerous game. Each plan felt like a fragile thread, woven together by the weight of our shared grief, our shared anger. I remember the first protest vividly, the chill of the night air snapping at my skin, the crowd thrumming with life. "No justice, no peace," they chanted, voices rising, intertwining in a symphony of defiance. The drumbeats of our hearts synchronized, a primal rhythm echoing through the streets as we marched, a wave of humanity crashing against the bastion of oppression. It felt surreal, electric, a moment suspended in time where anything seemed possible. But fear lurked just beyond the fringes, a spectre that whispered of consequences. I could see it in Amir's eyes as he looked over his shoulder, scanning the horizon. "What if they come for us?" he muttered, breaking the spell, turning the jubilant cries into a haunting melody. I wanted to reassure him, to tell him it would be okay, but the truth was gnawing at my insides. We were all standing on a precipice, the ground beneath us crumbling, ready to give way. They came like shadows at first, a line of blue that glinted ominously under the streetlights. I felt my heart seize, a predator stalking its prey. "Stay together!" I shouted, gripping Sarah's hand, feeling the slick sweat on her palm. We had to stand united, a fortress of flesh and blood against the encroaching darkness. The world became a blur, faces twisted in rage, fear, determination. The clash of shields, the crack of batons, the sharp scent of fear and adrenaline thickening the air. And then came the gas. A hiss, a flare of white that turned the night into a nightmare. I choked, the world spinning as I fumbled, clawing at my throat. Panic surged, an electric current buzzing through the crowd, a mass of bodies surging and falling, a tide of terror. "Amir! Sarah!" I screamed, my voice lost in the cacophony. I was adrift, struggling against an unseen tide, desperate to breathe, to find them again. I remember the moments that followed, scattered like shards of glass. A scream pierced the air, sharp and unyielding, a cry that belonged to someone, anyone. The world had erupted into chaos, and in that moment, it became beautifully tragic. We were all just trying to survive, to be seen, to be heard. I saw Sarah, her face streaked with tears and dirt, her spirit unbroken even in the face of violence. "This isn't the end," she shouted, her voice cutting through the smoke like a beacon. "We'll rise again." It became a mantra in my mind, a constant hum that echoed through the night. I fought my way back to Amir, and there he was, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead, a wild grin plastered across his face. "Told you it would be a party," he gasped, laughter mingling with the salt of his own blood. It was absurd and beautiful, this juxtaposition of fear and defiance, the human spirit refusing to bend, to break. But the night was far from over. As we regrouped, the weight of reality settled heavy on my shoulders. We were bruised, battered, yet alive, and in that moment, something raw and visceral ignited within me. The fear was still there, lurking, but it was overshadowed by a fierce determination, a flame that could not be extinguished. "Tomorrow," I said, breathless, my heart racing in my chest. "Tomorrow we come back. Stronger." And as the first light of dawn broke, casting shadows across the pavement, I knew this was just the beginning, a connection forged in fire and fury, a pact of resilience. The world shifted, and the battle lines blurred. What began in one city echoed through hearts far beyond, whispers of revolution dancing on the wind. The clock of history ticked on, the universe itself bearing witness to our struggle. We were ghosts of our pasts but warriors of our futures, carving our existence into the fabric of time. There was no end in sight, only the pulse of a heartbeat, tattooed on the thrumming surface of the earth, a promise that rang with every chant, every tear, every laugh that slipped through the chaos. Tonight was just a chapter, a prelude, a spark igniting the darkness. And as I stood there, surrounded by the remnants of a battle fought not just for ourselves but for everyone who felt invisible, I understood, we were unstoppable. The clock struck midnight, its chime echoing through the vacant streets like a death knell. Each toll sent a shiver down my spine, reverberating through the hollow shell of what used to be a community, a heartbeat now silenced. I remember how, just days before, light streamed through the windows of the cafe where we used to gather. Now it's a crumbling shell, a mausoleum of memories. The air was thick with electricity, the kind that crackles before the storm, filling the silence with unspeakable dread. It was then that I felt it, the weight of despair like a heavy shroud, pressing down on me, clamoring for attention. "Where are you?" whispered Ilara, her voice barely rising above the fray of the wind. She stood beside me, her eyes wide and reflecting the moonlight, haunted. I could see the tremors in her hands as she clutched the fabric of her jacket, a futile armor against the unseen horrors that lurked just outside the circle of flickering streetlights. The shadows danced around us, twisting and morphing, and for a moment, I thought I glimpsed the faces of those we once knew, now ghosts in a leaderless society where trust had dissipated like fog in the sun. "Do you think they're watching?" I murmured, more to myself than to her. A trio of shapes loomed nearby, half hidden beneath the remnants of a forgotten sign. They moved as if drawn by some dark magnetism, their intentions indistinguishable. Fear merged with curiosity, and in that moment, I became acutely aware of the fragility of our existence. It teetered on the edge of an abyss, and I was left scrambling for anything to hold on to. Ilara glanced at me, her eyes glittering with unshed tears, and I saw the flicker of the old, unyielding spirit within her, a fire that hadn't been extinguished despite the overwhelming darkness. "We have to keep moving," she urged, her voice a fragile thread in the vast ocean of despair. "We can't let them win." I remember the way hope felt, tender yet fierce. But it was a distant memory, a flickering candle in a torrential storm. Each step forward was a battle against the encroaching shadows that whispered our names, promising relief that would never come. We were two survivors adrift in a tempest, desperately seeking a lighthouse that no longer existed. Then there was Marcus. Stalwart, steadfast, but a storm raging within him. I recalled his laughter once, how it reverberated through the old brick walls like a song, a reminder of our humanity. Now, he stood apart, a statue of despair carved from stone, his eyes fixed on the ground as if it held the answers to questions we dared not ask. Marcus had always shielded us, the protector in a world turned upside down, but now he faltered, as if the very air around him had conspired to suffocate him. "I couldn't protect them," he whispered, the weight of his failures spilling from his lips like poison. "Not when they needed me the most." Each word fell like a hammer, breaking apart the fragments of hope that lingered in the air. I wanted to shake him, to scream that it wasn't his fault, that the world had transformed into a monster, devouring us whole. Instead, I reached out, letting my fingers brush against the fabric of his shirt, a fleeting connection, a pulse of shared despair. "Marcus," I started, but the words caught in my throat, tangled in the web of grief that enveloped him. The truth was, we were all drowning in it, a tide of regret and fear rising higher with every passing moment. The laughter we once shared felt like a distant echo, lost in the abyss of what used to be. I felt it then, the crack in my own heart, a fissure that threatened to swallow me whole. The wind howled, almost mocking us, and I fought the urge to collapse into despair. It clawed at my insides, an insatiable beast demanding to be fed. I remember the nights before, filled with laughter and warmth, how we dreamed under the stars, unknowing of the darkness that loomed ahead. Now, the cosmos felt indifferent, a cold expanse that mirrored the void in our souls. "Look!" Ilara's voice pierced the shroud of silence, her finger pointing toward the flickering shadows. Fear surged through my veins, turning my blood to ice. I squinted into the darkness, spotting figures moving with a predatory grace, eyes glinting in the dim light like wolves hungry for prey. My heart raced, pounding against my chest as if trying to escape the reality before us. "Run!" I shouted, adrenaline propelling me forward, and the night erupted into chaos. We fled, feet pounding against the pavement, echoes of our breaths merging with the cacophony of our despair. The shadows pursued us, relentless and insatiable. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown, a reminder that we were alive, yet so very close to being lost forever. I remember the taste of fear, bitter and metallic, a constant reminder of what was at stake. We were not just fighting for survival, we were fighting against the darkness that sought to consume our very essence. In our leaderless society, the abyss whispered promises of despair, and each moment felt like a surrender, a slow descent into hopelessness. But hope flickered, stubborn and fierce, even as we ran blind through the night. Ilara's hand gripped mine, a reminder that we were not alone in this. With every step, I could feel the weight of our shared fear, but also the spark of resilience that ignited in the depths of our intertwined souls. "Where do we go?" Marcus gasped, his voice trembling, the question hanging heavy in the air. No answer came, only the relentless thrum of our racing hearts and the shadows that threatened to swallow us whole. The night stretched endlessly ahead, and I realized then that we were all we had left, a broken trinity navigating the dark waters of despair. And in that realization, I felt a flicker of defiance rise from the ashes of our fear. We may have been leaderless, but we were not powerless. With every heartbeat, every breath, we fought against the encroaching darkness, clinging to the hope that flickered like a fragile candle in the vast, consuming night. As we ran, the shadows loomed ever closer, but we pressed on, woven together in our shared struggle against despair. There was no conclusion, no neat wrapping of our story, only the raw intensity of the moment, the fear, the pulse of defiance. In the depths of our terror, we found a flicker of resilience, a whisper of hope in a world that had turned its back. And so we ran, deeper into the night, toward the unknown that awaited us, tethered by the fragile threads of our shared humanity. The wind howled through the castle's empty halls, a mournful sound parting the shadows like a macabre symphony. I stood in the great hall, the cold stone a contrast to the heat boiling in my veins. The throne loomed at the end of the room, an ominous reminder of power unclaimed, of the bloodlines that had failed to produce an heir. The echoes of laughter that once filled these walls faded into a haunting silence, replaced by whispers of ambition and betrayal that lingered like smoke in the air. One just needed to breathe in deeply to taste the treachery. I remember the moment she stepped in, cloaked in the darkness of her own intentions. Lady Isolde, with her silver-streaked hair cascading down her back like a veil of mourning, wore a smile that could slice through flesh. Her eyes gleamed with the kind of hunger that comes from knowing the throne was ripe for the taking. I couldn't trust her. I never could. Yet, her presence was magnetic, pulling me closer, a moth drawn to a flame that could scorch my very soul. "You should show me the respect I deserve, Alaric," she spoke, her voice slow, deliberate. "After all, I am the closest kin to the throne now." A chill ran down my spine as I felt the weight of unyielding truth in her words. She was right. With the king's blood spilled on the cobblestones, the power vacuum had become a battleground, and every opportunist championed themselves as the rightful ruler. But I had my own demons to wrestle with, my brother, dead at the hands of those who sought power with ravenous greed. I was not just a man in mourning, I was a smoldering ember, ready to ignite in the overwhelming heat of vengeance. I clenched my fists, feeling the rough edges of my own grief, a burden I bore alone. "Respect? Is that what you seek, Isolde? Or do you crave dominion under the guise of kinship?" My voice tore through the silence, raw and jagged. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, replaced quickly by that all-too-familiar cunning. "You misunderstand me, Alaric. I seek what is rightfully mine. What is rightfully ours. The way she said ours twisted something in my gut. A tangle of jealousy and fear knotted within me. I knew her game, yet I could not shake the feeling that I was merely a pawn on a board I could not even see. As I stepped closer, the shadows danced around us, alive with the tension. Outside, the world carried on, unaware of the storm brewing within these walls. In the marketplace, vendors hawked their wares, laughter spilled like wine, and life pulsed with unrelenting ordinary joy. But here, ambition was ablade, and we were the fools too blinded by our own desires to see the blood that stained our hands. In the corner of the hall, a figure emerged. Garrick, once a loyal soldier, now turned mercenary, his loyalty offered to the highest bidder, a man whose morality had been bought and paid for. He sauntered forward, that smirk plaguing his lips. "The throne is a fine seat, isn't it?" he crooned, his voice dripping with mockery. "Too bad it's empty." "Or is it? Perhaps it could be warmed by one of us." I felt my heart quicken. He was a memory of brotherhood, now twisted into a shadow of betrayal. "You would betray us all for a moment on a throne of ash?" I spat, despising the weakness that clung to my voice. "Betrayal? Oh, dear Alaric, it's not betrayal. It's survival. You see, in this world, it's not enough to simply exist. You must take." Garrick's eyes darkened, glittering like stones in a grave. It was then that the air shifted. An idea, dark and intoxicating, crept into my mind. What if the game was not about power, but survival? What if reclaiming the throne meant extinguishing those who threatened to usurp my very soul? I could feel the pulse of the castle, the heartbeat of centuries past whispering promises of bloodshed, of history repeating itself in a dance of shadows. Isolde stepped closer, a predatory gleam igniting her gaze. "Think of it, Alaric. If we join forces, our strengths combined, there's no one who could stand against us." Her words were honeyed poison, sweet yet deadly. I wanted to scream, to shake the madness from her head, but her vision of unity was a siren's call, luring me into treacherous waters. But then came the memories of my brother, the laughter we once shared. I remembered our dreams, how we would carve our names into the history of this land, not with blood and treachery, but with honor and valor. "I will not betray my blood," I said, though my voice trembled under the weight of uncertainty. Garrick's laughter echoed through the hall, a harsh, jarring sound that twisted my gut. "Blood? In this game, blood is just another tool. It can be spilled or forged into a weapon." His eyes held a wild fervor, and in that moment, I couldn't tell if he was mad or simply ahead of the curve. The air thickened, expectation crackling between us. Shadows lurked, eager for the first betrayal. I could feel my own heart pounding in my ears, the rhythm of war calling. Each beat a reminder of what was at stake. "Make your choice, Alaric," Isolde whispered, her voice a silk-threaded dagger. "Join me or face the consequences." As the wind howled outside, the promise of chaos lingered, a spectre weaving through the cold stone walls, reminding us that the absence of an heir would not remain unfilled. The usurpers were circling, ready to claim their prize, and we were caught in a web of our own making. I could sense the shadows closing in, the weight of the throne pushing against my chest. Would I rise to become a king of ash or fall into a grave dug by my own hands? The choice was mine to make, but the price would be steep, echoing through the ages like a ghost in the night. There was no turning back now, the game had begun. The gunfire echoed through the narrow streets like a heartbeat, fast, frantic, pounding against the walls of crumbling buildings. I crouched behind a half-destroyed car, its metallic frame twisted, a ghost of what it once was. A child's shoe lay forgotten in the dust, a tiny relic of innocence lost. Each shot rang out, a reminder of how quickly the world could turn to chaos. I felt it in my bones, the terror, the suffocating weight of hopelessness pressing down on my chest. I remember when the sun used to rise over this city, casting warm light on laughter and dreams. Now, shadows stretched like claws over the remnants of life. I could hear her voice still, soft and strong, echoing in my mind, "We'll fight for our future." That was Lena. Her spirit burned brighter than any flame, yet now, her face was a mask of determination mingled with fear. "Where is she?" I whispered to myself, the words bitter on my tongue. Every heartbeat dragged me deeper into uncertainty, into the nightmarish reality of foreign hands reaching into our lives, puppeteering the strings of our fate. I felt the ghosts of history all around me, specters of nations long gone, their ambitions clashing against the fragile remains of our existence. And then there was Amir, my brother, the one who believed in honor and duty, even when both felt like chains wrapped around his heart. He had joined the resistance, believing he was fighting for us, but at what cost? I could still see the way he looked at the sky, as if hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything, that could save us. But the only thing he saw was the weight of the world above, pressing down until it threatened to crush him. The whispers of external powers thrummed through the air like a low, sinister hum. I could almost taste their influence, the promises wrapped in silk, the guns cloaked in charity. They had come for us, but they left behind wreckage, a festering wound in the fabric of our home. I remembered reading once about a past, long before this ruin, when borders were drawn in sand and blood, when trust was a currency that could be bartered for power. Stay low. Amir's voice cut through the fog of my thoughts, urgent, raw. The crack of a bullet ricocheted off the wall nearby, sending shards of stone into the air like confetti of despair. I pressed myself into the ground, feeling the grit of the earth seep into my skin, grounding me even as the chaos swirled around us. Lena! I called, my voice barely more than a whisper, but the name hung in the air, pregnant with fear and longing. I could picture her, defiant, spitting in the eyes of those who would shackle us. I remembered her smile, the way it lit up the dusky streets, how it promised a tomorrow, even when our today was on fire. She had always believed in the impossible, even when the world conspired against us. But the fire of her spirit was tempered by the harsh truths we faced. I could see her now, in my mind, standing atop a pile of rubble, shouting for our people to rise. She was a beacon, and I was the moth, drawn to her light, even as the shadows danced closer. The air felt electric, charged with a tension that could snap at any moment. I caught a glimpse of a figure moving through the debris, the silhouette unmistakable, Lena. She emerged from the haze, her hair wild, eyes fierce, radiating the fire that had always burned within her. "We have to go," she shouted, her voice like a battle cry. "Where?" I asked, my throat tight, every syllable an effort. The answer hung heavy. The world beyond our crumbling sanctuary was a vast sea of uncertainty, dark waters filled with predators waiting to pounce, using our weaknesses against us. "Anywhere but here." She reached for me, and for a fleeting moment, I felt the warmth of her hand, a lifeline in a world gone cold. But Amir's gaze pierced through the chaos, demanding to know, would we run or would we fight? "Do you even know what they want?" he hissed, his voice strained, as if he could feel the weight of nations upon his shoulders. "They're not here to save us. They're here to exploit our blood and dreams, to carve us into pieces to serve their hunger." The truth of his words wrapped around my heart, squeezing until I gasped for breath. The powers that meddled in our fate preyed on our desperation, our brokenness. They were watching, waiting for a moment of weakness to exploit. I felt the chill creep over me like a dark shroud, every breath a reminder of the fragility of hope. But Lena wouldn't falter. "We'll show them," she cried, her spirit igniting the air, defiance crackling like lightning. "We are not their pawns. They can't take what they haven't earned." Her fire burned through the darkness, and for a heartbeat, I believed. The specters of doubt faded, replaced by the raw pulse of resilience. We were not just victims, we were a storm, fierce and unyielding, ready to reclaim our narrative from the hands of those who sought to write it for us. The shadows shifted, the echoes of history whispering warnings, but I could feel the beat of our hearts in sync. Each pulse a reminder of our humanity, a defiance against the looming threat. "Together?" I breathed, the word a promise and a prayer. And in that moment, the world fell away, leaving only the three of us, broken yet unbowed, fierce in our unity against the looming darkness. The bullets, the chaos, the shadows of foreign powers faded into the background as we stepped into the light of our own making. I could hear the clock ticking, a reminder of time slipping through our fingers. But I held on to hope, held on to Lena and Amir, determined to face whatever horrors awaited us. We were not alone in this fight. We were alive, and the world was about to see just how brightly we could burn. And as the night deepened, the stage was set for a reckoning, where we would stand against the tide of manipulation, refusing to be drowned by the hands of those who thought they could exploit our weakness. It was only the beginning, a breath drawn before the plunge into the unknown. Raven's breath fogged the air as she stood at the threshold of her family's crumbling home, the world around her a chaotic symphony of sirens and shouts. Time felt suspended, the seconds stretching like taut strings ready to snap. Cinders danced in the evening sky, remnants of last night's fire igniting fears she thought were long extinguished. She could still taste the acrid smoke, bitter against her tongue. Every heartbeat pounded like a war drum, echoing the chaos rising in the streets outside. She could hear her mother's voice, stern, unyielding, a fortress against the storm. "Raven, grab the children. We can't lose them." Her mother's words pierced through the haze of panic, a beacon cutting through the smoke. But Raven hesitated, each second a battle waged within her heart, torn between duty and the instinctual need to flee. "Ma, they are scared." The children, her brother's twins, eyes wide, cheeks streaked with dirt and tears, clung to her skirt, their small bodies trembling against the onslaught of fear. She remembered the warmth of their laughter, the way they spun joy into the air like leaves caught in a breeze. Now, their innocence was a fragile thread ready to fray. Her mother, Sylvia, stood strong, shoulders squared against the encroaching darkness. A woman of resilience, she had raised Raven alone after losing her husband to the unrelenting grip of disease, a cruel spectre that hung over their family like a shadow, a constant reminder of fragility. "We face it together," Sylvia insisted. Her eyes, stormy and fierce, bore into Raven's soul, demanding surrender. "You think I haven't felt fear? It's in the marrow of my bones. But we don't run. We fight." Raven's heart twisted, a vine of guilt wrapping tighter. "What if I can't? What if I fail?" She didn't want to be weak, but the weight of expectation bore down upon her, a heavy cloak woven with threads of her mother's unyielding strength. So many nights she had lain awake, haunted by the spectre of inadequacy, the fear of not living up to the legacy. "Failure?" Sylvia chuckled, a sound both bitter and sweet, laced with the taste of years worn like armor. "Failure is just another word for living. Each breath is a battle. You embrace it. You learn." Outside, the chaos surged, a tide of terror threatening to swallow them whole. The city, once vibrant and alive, now a carcass, groaned under the weight of its own despair. Shadows flickered in the distance, hints of figures moving, desperate and lost. The air tasted of ash and despair, a grim reminder that nothing was sacred anymore. A piercing scream broke through the fabric of the night, dragging Raven back to the present, back to the here and now. It was a cry of a mother, the kind that shatters the soul, reverberating through the very core of existence. The twins shivered against her, their small hands clasping her legs, seeking refuge in the storm. "Think about your father," Sylvia whispered, her voice now a fragile thread stretched thin over the chasm of loss. "He wouldn't want us to cower. Remember how he fought for us? For you?" Raven felt the ache of those memories, her father, a giant of a man, laughter rumbling like thunder, his hands calloused but gentle. He had faced the world like a warrior, arms thrown wide to embrace both joy and pain. She remembered the way he had spun tales of bravery, tales that now echoed in her heart, urging her to rise. "But I'm not him," she whispered, tears brimming, threatening to spill over like the tide. "No, you're not," her mother replied, fierce and unyielding, pushing Raven's chin up, forcing her to meet the intensity of her gaze. "But you have him in you. You have the fire. Let it burn." The world outside screamed, a cacophony of desperation. Each cry pulled at the strings of her heart. Raven felt the weight of 1,000 eyes upon her, the weight of history, of loss, of women before her who had fought, bled, and clawed for their place. She could hear the whispers of her grandmother and great-grandmother, their stories woven into the fabric of her being, unfurling like petals in the dark. "I remember," she breathed, her voice a fragile ember against the wind. "I remember their strength. I remember the stories." And in that moment, a shift occurred. Hope ignited in the pit of her stomach, a flicker against the backdrop of despair. "We can't just stand here," she said, voice trembling but growing. "We have to fight. Together." Sylvia's smile cracked through the storm, radiant against the bleakness. "That's my girl. Let's show them what we're made of." As they stepped into the chaos, hand in hand, the night exploded around them, a myriad of colors, screams mixing with the burning air, the heat of anger fueling their resolve. And in that tumult, the twins, innocent and pure, stood by their side, their small hands clasped together, a symbol of the future they fought to protect. The battle began not with swords, but with hearts. The fight for their home, their legacy, erupted in a cacophony of love and rage, a reminder that in the darkest moments, matriarchs rise. They stand unwavering, fierce guardians against the tide of despair, weaving together threads of strength, love, and defiance. Raven felt the pulse of her lineage in that moment, the ancient rhythm of women who had stood before her, warriors, nurturers, matriarchs whose legacies were written not in stone, but in the very fabric of their beings. She was part of something far greater, a continuum of strength that surged through her veins. As the night unfolded, chaos swirled, but hope ignited, a flame that would not be extinguished. Each heartbeat thrummed with the promise of resistance, every breath filled with the weight of 1,000 stories, 1,000 fights. They were the matriarchs of their own fate, carving a path through the darkness, leading their family into the dawn. And in that gripping moment, under the shadows of despair, amidst the flickering lights of hope, their fight had only just begun. Shadows danced along the damp stone walls of the throne room, flickering like the last gasps of a dying ember. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of betrayal and blood. I stood there, heart pounding, the echo of a gunshot still reverberating in my mind. The pulse of the palace was alive with whispers that crawled beneath my skin, a reminder that power was as fragile as glass, and just as deadly. I remember the moment vividly, the way the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The body crumpled, lifeless, and in that second, everything changed. The air was charged with a silent scream, a desperate plea for justice that would never come. It was not just a murder, it was the assassination of hope itself. And in the void left behind, chaos reigned. I glanced at Elara, her eyes wide, glimmering with unshed tears, yet fierce with resolve. She was fierce, a lioness caught in a cage of deceit, her strength both admirable and heartbreaking. A leader in her own right, but now, in this moment of crisis, she felt every inch the prey. "It can't end like this," she whispered, the tremor in her voice betraying the bravado she tried to project. I felt her fear intertwine with mine, wrapping around my chest like a vice. What were we to do now, with the air thick with the scent of gunpowder and the taste of fear on our tongues? The walls echoed the downfall of our dreams, the dreams of a kingdom that could have been. Each heartbeat screamed for action, yet we stood paralyzed, rooted in uncertainty. The tension was palpable, each second stretching into eternity. I could almost hear the clock ticking down, each tick a reminder that time was on the side of those who lurked in the shadows. Those who had a taste for power, who thrived in the darkness. A ghost of a smile danced on my lips, ironic in its whimsy. How absurd, I thought, that we were caught in a theater of madness, where the play had turned bloody and the actors were mere pawns in a game we didn't even understand. And then there was Marcus, my once loyal friend, now a spectre cloaked in ambition. He stood at the edge of the room, eyes narrowed, calculating the fallout like a chess master anticipating the next move. "This isn't over," he hissed, venom dripping from every word. I could see his mind racing, plotting how to seize the throne left vacant by the fallen leader. I felt betrayed, as if a dagger had pierced the fragile fabric of our friendship. "Is this what you wanted?" I spat, the bitterness thick on my tongue. "To watch us tear each other apart?" The truth stung like ice, sharp and unyielding. I could taste the bitterness of betrayal, and it tore through me, unraveling every moment we had shared. In that charged silence, the weight of our past hung over us, memories flickering like candlelight on the brink of extinguishment. I remembered laughter shared in the moonlight, dreams spun like gossamer threads. But here we were, facing a darkness that threatened to engulf us whole. Elara stepped forward, her voice trembling but fierce. "We can't let them win. We can't turn on each other." Her words were arrows, piercing through the thick fog of despair, but the reality was suffocating. There were no allies in this battle, only shadows fighting for supremacy. "Winning isn't everything, Ilara," I murmured, my voice a ghost of its former strength. "Sometimes it's just about survival." And as I said it, I could feel the truth of it settling like a stone in my gut. Survival at any cost. I could hear the distant howl of the wind, an omen perhaps, as if the cosmos itself was watching us with bated breath. Outside, the city was alive with chaos, a frenzy of people scrambling, desperate for direction in this new world without a leader. The very heartbeat of the kingdom was faltering, and we were the architects of its doom. Suddenly, a crash echoed through the chamber. The heavy doors swung open, and a wave of guards poured in, their faces painted with the same fear that gripped us. "We must act now," one shouted. "They're coming for you." Fear rippled through me, a visceral reaction. They weren't just coming for us, they were coming for everything we had ever stood for. I could feel the walls closing in, the shadows growing longer and darker. The air crackled with uncertainty, and I was caught in an electric current that threatened to pull me under. "Run," I breathed, the word barely escaping my lips. In that moment, my heart beat in sync with the chaos outside, a frantic rhythm that echoed the cries of the people. I saw the glint of ambition in Marcus's eyes as he weighed his options, and I knew he was already plotting his escape, his betrayal lurking just beneath the surface. "Stay together!" Ilara cried, her voice a beacon amid the gathering storm. But the distance between us felt vast, an insurmountable chasm of trust eroded by ambition. I could feel the edges of my resolve fraying, and I knew the battle wasn't just outside, it was within each of us too. As I turned to run, my heart racing, I could almost hear the clock ticking, a reminder that time was slipping away. Shadows clung to the cold stone, whispering secrets I was too afraid to unravel. The ghosts of our past chased us, and the future lay shrouded in darkness. I took a deep breath, the taste of ash lingering on my tongue. There would be no easy answers tonight. All we had were our truths, the ones we were so desperately trying to conceal. As I fled into the night, I could feel the weight of the world pressing down on me, a reminder of every choice yet to come. I remembered the laughter, the dreams, and the shadows that now threatened to consume us whole. I could only hope that somewhere, in this chaotic void, we might find a flicker of light to guide us through the darkness. But for now, we were players in a dangerous game, and the stakes had never been higher. The clock struck midnight, but it was a hollow sound, echoing through the empty streets of a city once vibrant, now a shadow of its former self. The air was thick with tension, palpable like a storm brewing just out of sight. A lone figure darted into the alley, heart pounding, breath rapid and shallow. Samuel had never intended to be a fugitive, but here he was, the darkness swallowing him whole, the weight of 1,000 choices pressing on his chest. He could hear the distant shouting, the chaos spilling from the crumbling government building like a spilled ink pot, staining the fabric of their lives. I remember the first time I felt the fear crawl up my spine, the first time it became clear that the reign of law had been suffocated by greed and apathy. I remember the faces of those who had once been leaders, they had become ghosts, shadows flitting through the corridors of power, their eyes vacant, their hearts corrupted. Samuel's fingers trembled as he held a crumpled piece of paper, a desperate plea for help, transformed into a weapon against the very people meant to protect him. And there was Maria. Her laughter once filled the market square, bright and infectious, a melody threading through the fabric of daily life. But that laughter had turned to whispers, anxiety draping over her like a shroud. Her world had become a prison of her own making, each moment a countdown to the inevitable confrontation with the truth. She stood at her window, watching the city burn with the flickering glow of fires set by desperation and anger, her heart a battlefield. "Do you remember?" she whispered to the shadows, her breath escaping her lips like a prayer. "Do you remember the way it was? When hope was something we breathed, not something we clutched like a dying ember." Her voice cracked, the weight of loss hanging heavily in the air. The city had once danced in the moonlight, but all that remained now were echoes of laughter, memories trapped within the cracked walls of abandoned buildings. Samuel had seen too much of the corruption that had seeped into the very bones of their governance. I remember the hollow-eyed bureaucrats, their hands stained with the ink of false promises, the way they smiled like wolves in sheep's clothing. Each day, the line separating right from wrong blurred further until it dissolved into a haze of inefficiency. He had tried to speak out, tried to rally the people, but his voice had been drowned out by the clamor of greed. "Do you hear them?" he shouted into the darkness, hands clenched into fists. "Do you hear their lies? They cover our mouths while they feast on our despair." The shadows swallowed his words, but still, he fought. Each heartbeat screamed for justice, for accountability. Those were words that had turned into mere ghosts, floating through the air, never to be touched. The people were too afraid, too beaten down to stand beside him. The fear had become a weapon, sharp and unrelenting. And Maria, she had watched him from afar, a flickering flame of hope in her chest, ignited by his courage. But with each passing day, that flame flickered dangerously low. The whispers of her friends, the accusatory glances, the fear of retribution, it all wrapped around her like a noose, tightening with every choice not made. I could join him, she thought, heart racing, but at what cost? The city creaked under the weight of its own despair, like an ancient ship sinking beneath the waves of its own recklessness. I remember the faces of the people who once believed in their leaders, now twisted with distrust, hollow and haunted. It felt as though the earth itself was conspiring against them, swallowing hope whole and spitting out despair. The shadows grew longer, creeping into every corner, suffocating the last vestiges of light. The night was restless, alive with the sounds of chaos, the shouts, the cries, the clash of desperation against power. Samuel moved through the darkness, a restless spirit searching for purpose, for clarity in the chaos. He stumbled upon a gathering, a ragtag group of the disillusioned. Their eyes sparked with a mix of fear and determination. "We can't let them take everything from us," a voice rose above the cacophony. "We have to fight. We have to show them we're still here." I remember the fire in their eyes, the trembling hope igniting a spark in my own heart. But still, doubt lingered, a ghost that refused to be banished. How could they fight against a machine so corrupt, a system that thrived on their suffering? And yet, there was Maria, standing on the precipice, her heart torn between safety and the urge to reclaim her city, her home. "Samuel," she cried out, her voice cutting through the noise, raw and powerful. He turned, and for a moment, time slowed. Their eyes locked, a moment of recognition, of shared pain and unspoken dreams. "I'm with you," she said, stepping from the shadows into the chaos, the weight of 1,000 fears cascading from her shoulders. "Together, we can be the spark." But the shadows were merciless, they loomed larger, darker. The confrontation was inevitable, a storm brewing on the horizon, and the air crackled with tension. The government's hand was heavy, the voices of dissent crushed beneath its iron fist. But as Samuel and Maria stood against the tide, they felt the pulse of the city beneath their feet, a heartbeat echoing their own, a reminder that they were not alone. And for the first time, hope flickered in the depths of despair, a fragile flame flickering against the night. But the darkness laughed, its laughter echoing through the alleyways, whispering secrets that would chill their bones. The promise of tomorrow was uncertain, but the fight had begun, a desperate dance against the void. In that moment, they became more than just individuals, they became symbols of resistance against the decline of governance, against corruption and inefficiency. Every heartbeat was a declaration, every breath a promise. The city was alive, trembling with anticipation, echoing with the ghosts of those who had come before. And the story, fraught with tension and yearning, was far from over, it was only just beginning. The air crackles with tension, the kind that thickens like fog, swallowing the light of day whole. A single candle flickers on the table, casting trembling shadows against the bare walls of a derelict gallery, paint peeling like the memories trapped inside. Outside, the world is a cacophony of chaos, screams, sirens, the heartbeat of a city unraveling. Inside, it feels like the last bastion of sanity, yet even here, the shadows hold secrets darker than night. I stand frozen, paintbrush in hand, staring at the canvas, a chaotic swirl of colors that mirror the turmoil outside. A figure emerges, a ghostly silhouette, arms stretched in agony, as if pleading for release from the shackles of an identity torn apart. I remember how it felt to create, to lose myself in strokes of color, to find solace in the rhythm of my hand against the canvas. But that was before the world fractured, before art became a weapon and identity a battleground. Across the room, Myra watches, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She is a poet, words her refuge, yet today, they elude her like wisps of smoke. Her notebook lies abandoned, pages crumpled and stained with the weight of unspoken fears. "How can I write?" she whispers, her voice trembling like the candlelight. "How can I capture this horror?" I want to tell her that art is not about capturing, it's about releasing. That in the act of creation, we bleed our truths onto the canvas, onto the page, like a cathartic ritual. But the words stick in my throat, heavy and unwelcome. I can see the ghosts in her eyes, the shadows of her past clawing at her sanity. She once spoke of dreams that danced in her mind, vibrant tales spun from the threads of her soul. Now, those dreams lay crushed beneath the weight of reality. "Do you remember the night we read under the stars?" I ask, trying to summon a flicker of light amidst her darkness. "When we believed our words could change the world." Her gaze drifts to the window, where the distant wail of a siren stabs at the silence. "What world?" she replies, her voice thick with despair. "What future is left when everything we built is in ruins?" I want to scream, to shake her from this abyss, but I know that despair is a seductive force. It wraps around you like a shroud, whispering sweet nothings of hopelessness. I remember the walls of this gallery, filled with our laughter, our dreams. Now, they stand as a tomb, a mausoleum for a culture ripped apart by fear and hatred. And then there's Amir, lurking in the shadows like a spectre of his former self. Once the fearless curator, now a man haunted by the ghosts of his decisions. He watches us, his brow furrowed in anguish, a tempest raging behind his dark eyes. The weight of his silence is a burden I can feel pressing down on my chest. "You can't escape your choices, can you?" he mutters, almost to himself. Every decision echoes, every silence screams. Amir was once the voice of our collective identity, a beacon of hope in artistic expression. Now, he stands on the precipice of despair, teetering between the man he was and the shadow he fears becoming. I want to reach out to him, to pull him back from the edge, but there's a chasm between us, filled with regret and unspoken words. "Do you remember the mural we painted together?" I say, trying to bridge that space. The one that celebrated our heritage. His lips curl into a bitter smile, a ghost of the joy that once lit up his face. "Heritage," he scoffs, the word dripping with irony. "What good is heritage when it's erased with each passing day? When our stories are reduced to ashes?" I can feel the weight of his pain like a leaden cloak wrapped around my shoulders. The city outside is aflame with discord, a relentless storm of ideologies clashing, tearing at the very fabric of our unity. The art we once held dear is now a battleground, its meaning twisted to serve the narratives of the powerful. I remember the first time I painted, pure exhilaration, freedom spilling from my fingertips. Now, every stroke feels like a rebellion, a defiance against the encroaching darkness. "Art is the only thing we have left," I whisper, my voice barely audible above the chaos outside. "It is our truth, our identity, and it cannot be taken from us." Myra's eyes glimmer with a flicker of hope, but it's fragile, like a candle in a storm. "And what if that truth is lost?" she asks, her voice trembling. "What if we can't find our way back?" Amir steps closer, shadows clinging to him like a second skin. "We have to remember," he says, his voice steady, an anchor amidst the tempest. "We must carve our stories into the stones of this city, or they will be forgotten. We are the architects of our identity, even now." And in that moment, I feel the pulse of something greater than fear, a flicker of resilience igniting the air around us. I grab my brush, each stroke a fierce declaration against the impending darkness. Myra stirs, her notebook trembling in her hands, words swirling like a storm within her mind. Amir's silence shifts, as if he feels the gravity of our collective heartbeat. We are not victims, we are creators. In this fractured world, our voices will rise like flames, illuminating the path through the ashes of despair. I remember the echoes of laughter, the vibrant strokes of color, the power of words. I remember who we are, and for a fleeting heartbeat, that memory becomes our lifeline. And as the shadows loom ever closer, we stand united, poised on the brink of a confrontation that will define our very existence. The city outside may be crumbling, but within these walls, we are alive, burning, fighting, and creating. Art, literature, identity, each a weapon in the hands of the desperate, a lifeline for the lost. The sirens wail outside, but inside, the pulse of creation beats louder. We are not finished yet. The air was thick with smoke, acrid and unforgiving, as the last echo of gunfire faded into a haunting silence. I stood at the edge of the shattered city, the ground trembling beneath my feet, each tremor a reminder of what once stood, tall buildings now reduced to skeletal remains, like the broken dreams of those who called this place home. I remember the faces, the laughter, the lives threaded together like fragile strands of silk, now frayed and scattered like ashes on the wind. My heart raced, pounding against my ribcage like a frantic drum, and I knew it wasn't just the chaos that fueled my fear, it was the terrifying realization that in this void, power was shifting, and with it, everything we had ever known. In the shadows, I saw her, Mara. She crouched low, eyes glimmering with a wild intensity, a fierce spark ignited by desperation. Her hair tangled, matted with the remnants of yesterday's battles, she was a warrior forged in the fires of loss. The world had stripped her bare, yet it had also made her unstoppable. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice a jagged edge slicing through the stillness, and in that moment, I felt the weight of her resolve, heavy yet oddly uplifting. She lived and breathed rebellion, the system that had once oppressed her was now a distant memory, a ghost haunting her past. I remember how I admired her then, how I wanted to be as unbreakable as she seemed. But then there was Alex, standing just a heartbeat away, his hands trembling as they clutched a tattered map that was more wish than reality. He looked like he was carrying the weight of every fallen soul on his narrow shoulders. "It can't end like this," he murmured, almost to himself, caught in the web of his own doubt. "We have to find a way." I could see it in his eyes, that flicker of hope buried beneath layers of fear and self-reproach. The boy who had once dreamed of changing the world now stood paralyzed, teetering on the brink of despair, searching for a path that no longer existed. His voice cracked, a fragile sound that echoed in the hollow spaces around us. I wanted to reach out, to tell him that we would find a way, but the words caught in my throat, lost among the ruins. The echoes of distant sirens grew louder, and I felt the urgency tightening around us like a noose. "We can't wait," Mara insisted, her gaze piercing through the haze. "This is our moment. We redefine what power means." She stood taller, defiant, a beacon of light in the encroaching darkness. I felt my breath quicken, the gravity of her words pulling me in, a magnet to her fervor. What was power anyway? A throne made of bones? A crown stained with blood? Or perhaps something more visceral, a connection, a spark igniting a flame? I remember feeling the pulse of rebellion thrumming in my veins. We were the architects of a new system, birthed from the ashes of collapse. But Alex, dear Alex, was like a shadow of doubt clawing at the edges of my mind. "What if we fail?" he murmured, the words dripping with the weight of his fears. I hated that I understood. I wanted to scream, to shake him free from the chains of his self-doubt. "What if we don't?" I shot back, frustration spilling over. "What if we become the change we need?" My voice trembled, the desperation raw and exposed. The air felt electric, charged with our conflicting energies, the push and pull of hope and despair. I wanted to believe, to shatter the illusions that had kept us shackled for so long. The city around us seemed to listen, the remnants of what once was holding its breath, waiting for our next move. Shadows darted between the crumbling walls, figures lurking just out of sight, a reminder that the old guard was not yet gone. They thrived in the chaos, feeding on the uncertainty, sowing fear like seeds in a parched field. I felt a chill creep down my spine, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against my skin. But the air was thick with the scent of rebellion, and I couldn't shake off the electrifying belief that change was possible. Together, Mara urged, her voice a battle cry rising above the cacophony of doubt. "We rise together or we fall together." Her intensity ignited a fire within me, and I clenched my fists, feeling the rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I was terrified, yes, but more than that, I was alive, alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Could we really carve out a new path from this wreckage? Could we defy the very structures that had chained us? I nodded, catching Alex's gaze, and for a fleeting moment, we shared a silent promise, a pact forged in the furnace of our despair. I remembered how we had longed for something more, how we had whispered dreams of a world reborn. The echoes of our laughter, our hopes, swirled around us, an intoxicating blend of fear and exhilaration. The sirens blared louder now, a siren song luring us into the storm, and I could feel the world shifting beneath our feet. Time seemed to stretch, seconds morphing into an eternity, the cosmos watching, waiting. I remember the heartbeat of the earth, a pulsing rhythm that resonated with our own. The shadows danced, and the darkness felt alive, ready to swallow us whole or yield a spark of light. "Are you ready?" Mara asked, her voice steady, a tether anchoring us in that moment. I swallowed hard, the taste of blood and ash lingering on my tongue. I was scared, but beneath that fear lay a fierce determination, an undeniable urge to fight. Together, I whispered, and in that unity, I felt the walls of despair begin to crumble. As we stepped into the unknown, the horizon brightened, the air filled with the promise of a storm, of change. The void was no longer just a chasm of despair, it was a canvas, waiting for the brushstrokes of our defiance. And in that fleeting moment, I grasped the truth: power is forged in the fire of our collapse, a wild, unpredictable force that could ignite hope or unleash chaos. The world had fallen apart, but from its ashes, we could rise. Together. The cold wind howled through the empty halls of the castle, rattling the ancient stones, each creak echoing like the mournful cries of a forgotten era. I stood on that crumbling balcony, my heart racing, the distant sound of a horn piercing the grim silence. A funeral dirge? An omen? The ground trembled beneath my feet, and I could almost hear the whispers of those who had walked these very stones before me, angry echoes of ambition and betrayal, of kings and queens who had ruled with iron fists until time reduced them to dust. Rhaena, her fiery hair whipping around her face like a storm, burst through the door, her eyes wild with desperation. "They're coming for us!" "They know," her voice cracked, the weight of unspoken fears pressing down like a leaden shroud. The throne, unclaimed, empty, loomed behind me, a mocking reminder of all that was lost. No heirs to claim it, no bloodline to sustain the empire. Just silence, and a path strewn with the bones of every choice made in the name of power. "Shut the door," I hissed, glancing back. Memories flooded my mind, the flickering torchlight casting shadows of a time when we believed in the sanctity of lineage. What a joke! I remember my father, his face pale, a ghost waiting for the executioner's call, his throne turned to ash, his legacy slipping through his fingers like sand. "They'll think we're weak, Rhaena. They'll come for us all." Her hands trembled as she ran them through her hair, revealing the jagged scars of her past, a past tangled in alliances formed in the dark corners of this castle. She was fiercely loyal, a warrior of the heart, yet her heart was a battlefield, riddled with doubt. "And what if they do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but the question hung heavy in the air like a noose. "What if we're already lost?" I stepped closer, feeling the heat of her desperation, the desperation of countless generations who had clutched at empty thrones, seeking validation in the echoes of history. There was a time when I believed in bloodlines, in the purity of royal lineage, but now I saw it for the folly it was, a joke played by fate on those too blind to see. "We fight, Rhaena. We fight until our last breath." My words felt like shards of glass, cutting through the darkness. The shadows danced around us, weaving tales of ghosts long past, of kings who'd lost their heads and queens whose laughter had turned to screams. I could see them in my mind, their eyes wide with fear, the weight of their choices crashing down as their thrones crumbled beneath them. They didn't know. They never knew. I remember how my father used to say, "An heir is a shield against history." But what good is a shield when the enemy lies within? And then there was Lysander. A ghost in the corner of my thoughts, a spectre of ambition and disappointment. He stood in the shadows now, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, his presence a dark cloud hovering over us. "You think we can hold the line?" You think this is just about us?" His voice dripped with scorn, and for a moment, I felt the weight of his disappointment like a stone lodged in my throat. The throne has no heirs, only vultures waiting to feast. We're nothing but a footnote in someone else's history. I wanted to choke on his words, to spit back defiance, but I felt it too, the cold grip of inevitability tightening around my heart. I remember the stories my mother used to tell, tales of valor and courage, of kings and queens who'd faced down their fates with fire in their hearts. But this was different. This was the reality of a world that had forgotten us. "What do you propose?" I asked, each syllable heavy with resignation. "Lay down and die." His laughter was a bitter sound, echoing through the night, a sound that felt like broken glass. "No. We'll fight, but it'll be a losing battle. They'll take what they want, and we'll be left as shadows, mere ghosts in the hallways of memory. Like them." He gestured to the walls, and I could almost see the faces of those who had come before, their dreams dashed against the stones. Raina clenched her fists, her spirit ablaze with indignation. "We are not them. We are not mere echoes. We will carve our names into the annals of history, even if it kills us." Her words struck a chord deep within me, but the spectre of doubt loomed large. I remember standing in the very spot where she stood, defiance in my heart, but the weight of the crown had crushed my spirit. The wind howled outside, a mournful song that seemed to echo all around us as we stood on the precipice of a decision that could very well be our last. I felt the pulse of the castle, the heartbeat of history itself. "Then let's make history," I said, steeling my resolve. "Let them come." And as the chill of night settled in, the distant sound of horns grew louder, a cacophony of opportunity and chaos. I could taste the bitter tang of fear and exhilaration on my tongue, a concoction of dread and anticipation. What lessons had history taught us? That those without heirs would be consumed by the very power they sought to wield, that vacuums of power breed chaos, that thrones without blood lead to nothing but despair. But amidst the uncertainty, a flicker of hope ignited within me. I remembered the stories of rebellion, the tales of the bold who dared to challenge fate. We would be the architects of our own legacy, even if it meant tearing apart the very foundations of what was once sacred. In that moment, as the shadows closed in and the air thickened with impending confrontation, I felt alive. And the castle, with its ghosts and echoes, bore witness to our resolve, to the fire that surged in our hearts. Time, like a relentless tide, pulled us forward, and the past, with all its lessons, loomed large behind us, waiting for our choice to become another story in its endless chronicle of what it means to fight for a throne without an heir. The air was thick with despair, the kind that wraps around you like a suffocating shroud, a reminder that life can change in an instant. I stood in the remnants of what was once a bustling marketplace, the scent of charred wood mingling with the acrid stench of smoke. A child's laughter echoed eerily, a ghostly reminder of innocence lost. I could almost see the faces of the vendors, their smiles now replaced with ash-streaked grief. I remembered the way sunbeams danced on their stalls, but now all that was left were shadows, stretching in the flickering light of the dying flames. I was not alone in this wasteland of broken dreams. Across the debris, I saw Ilara, her eyes wide, drenched in a mixture of disbelief and anger. The fire had taken everything from her, the little shop she had poured her heart into, the dreams she had whispered to the stars at night. "It's not just a shop," she screamed, her voice cracking like shattered glass. "It was my life." She kicked a charred board, and a splinter dug into her foot, but she didn't care. Pain was familiar now, an old friend that wouldn't let her go. Then there was Marcus, standing a few paces behind her, a figure cloaked in uncertainty. He had always been the rock, but now, even the stones crumble under pressure. His hand trembled as he clutched a photograph, the last remnant of his family, smiling against a backdrop of wildflowers. Their faces, frozen in time, felt like a cruel taunt. "Why didn't I bring them to the city sooner?" he whispered, the question hanging like a noose around his neck. He had left them behind, convinced he could build a better life, convinced he could protect them. But now, all was lost. He was the architect of devastation. I remember the night the crisis hit, the sharp crack of thunder echoing in the distance, a prelude to the chaos that would unravel before dawn. The world turned upside down, and we were left grasping at threads, struggling to weave a new tapestry from the frayed edges of our lives. In that moment of reckoning, the three of us, Ilara, Marcus, and I, understood that the path forward was not a straight line. It was a meandering road, littered with stones of doubt and brambles of fear. As the embers danced into the night sky, I caught a glimpse of a future that felt as elusive as the smoke curling away into the darkness. "We need a plan," I said, my voice cutting through Ilara's sobs. It sounded foreign even to me, as if I were some distant observer speaking through a veil. "We can't just sit and let this destroy us." Ilara turned to me, her eyes like mirrors reflecting a storm. "What plan?" "We've lost everything." Her voice rose, a crescendo of anguish that echoed back through the rubble. I felt her pain, raw and jagged, but I also felt something else, a flicker of defiance igniting in the ashes. "We have to rebuild," I replied, a conviction threading through my words like life through a needle. Marcus stepped forward, his shoulders squared. "What if we start with the people? The ones who still have their homes, or more importantly, their hearts." His voice was steady now, a lifeline thrown into the turbulent seas of despair. "We need to gather everyone, share our stories. We need to remind ourselves that we're more than what was taken from us." I remembered sitting in the glow of a fire years ago, telling tales that bound communities together. The laughter, the tears. Those stories were our lifeblood, and they could flow again. "The light will come back," I said, remembering a phrase my grandmother used to murmur. "Even the night yields to dawn." The plan began to take shape, each word weaving a fragile thread of hope. We would create a communal space, a gathering of hearts. Ilara, with her fiery spirit, would harness the power of art, painting murals that told our stories. Marcus would be the voice, organizing meetings, inviting everyone to share their grief, their anger, their dreams. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting everything in a wash of twilight, I felt the stirrings of something profound. But the path was not without its thorns. Doubt slinked around us like a shadow, whispering that we would fail. I watched Ilara as she painted, each brushstroke a catharsis, yet I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. "What if no one comes?" she mused, her voice softening as if the words themselves carried the weight of the world. I stood beside her, my heart pounding. "What if they do?" Marcus's laughter broke the tension, a sound that sliced through despair. "Let's bring the noise back to the streets. A celebration of survival." His wild enthusiasm ignited something inside us. It was contagious, electric. We could hear the echoes of a community, long dormant, stirring awake. Yet, the ghosts of our pasts haunted every step. I remembered the faces we had lost. Theirs were a constant reminder of what was at stake. As we forged ahead, every brushstroke, every spoken word, was a tribute to those lives, a promise to honor their memory. The city became our canvas, our theater, a living testament to resilience. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the wounds began to heal. The market returned, not as it was, but as something stronger, more vibrant, filled with laughter and music that coursed through the streets like lifeblood. And in that tumultuous blend of sorrow and joy, we found stability not in perfection but in our shared humanity. I stood back, watching Ilara laugh as children painted beside her, their faces streaked with colors that mirrored the chaos we had survived. Marcus, with a megaphone in hand, rallied the crowd, his voice a beacon of unity. They were no longer just fragments of broken stories, they were the architects of a new narrative, one that whispered of hope and healing. Yet still, the shadows lurked, ever present, reminding us that the path forward was fraught with uncertainty. But in that uncertainty, we found strength. We found each other. And as the stars began to twinkle above, I realized the journey wasn't about the destination, it was about the struggle, the heartbreak, the laughter echoing in the night. The world was still a fragile place, but together, we had woven something beautiful from the ashes. The clock ticked on, relentless and unforgiving, but we would face whatever came next, together. And in that certainty, there was a powerful magic, a promise that our stories, our voices, and our hearts would always find a way to rise from the darkness.